Kate Mila Falcha, welcome to Irish Granny Tarot. It's time for our Saturday book. And this week I needed a break from politics and terrible social issues and, craziness. And I discovered a book that talked about a topic I've often been curious about, unresolved, I believe. And it turned out I didn't know as much as I thought I did about this case, and it's really, really, really interesting. And wouldn't you know, it ties into Nazis and fascism and eugenics, and it's really a true crime book. So, what am I talking about? A Talent to Deceive. The Search for the Real Killer of the Lindbergh Baby by William Norris, and it's a really good book. It's so interesting. I tried to track the author down. I simply could not find contact information from him. I would love to talk to him about this book. This book was written in 2020, and let's just get right into it. So, Charles Lindbergh. Let me see if these glasses are too... Sometimes the light, I think I can do it. The light coming in these windows is very reflective, and I know it's annoying. So, okay, Charles Lindbergh, in May of 1927, at the age of 28, he was the first individual to fly solo across the Atlantic. Big national hero, big international star. He married Anne Murrow, the daughter of a very wealthy man, the Mexican ambassador, a former lawyer and banker, and U.S. Senator Dwight Morrow Sr., as you will discover. They were married in May of 1929. He was the big hero, idol, saint, revered celebrity person, and she was a very indulged, rich girl. And they had this terrible tragedy in 1932, March 1st, 1932, which is what got me interested in the case. I look for things that are happening around this particular time of year, and March 1st was when this terrible tragedy happened. Their baby was kidnapped. Their first child, a little boy, was kidnapped from their rural Hopewell, New Jersey home, and a ransom of $50,000 was demanded. Eventually, the baby's body was found in the woods about 2 miles away from the house. This was characterized as the crime of the century, and there was just a media frenzy, as much media frenzy as there could be in 1932. In 1929, when their engagement was announced, Anne's favorite brother Dwight Jr., who was 21 at the time and who was diagnosed schizophrenic, he flew into a jealous rage that her sister was engaged to this big hero. And he had suffered recurrent bouts of mental illness and did so for the rest of his life. He felt that Lindbergh stole his sister and would replace Dwight Morrow Jr. as the head of the family when Senator Dwight Morrow Sr. died. He was sent to residential care, a locked hospital unit, because he was too unsafe to even have him at the wedding. Because of who Lindbergh was, their marriage was inundated with, today we'd call them paparazzi, the press. They took a honeymoon in a cabin cruiser off the coast of Maine so that they would not be bothered by anybody. They spent the rest of the time till the birth of their son, Charles Jr. He was born at home. He was born June 22nd, 1930. They spent the rest of the time between their marriage and his birth flying all over the United States and the Caribbean. They were in search of privacy. They were hounded constantly by the press. And in search of privacy, they bought 500 acres of woods in New Jersey, very rural, and built a house in the middle of this, and had just begun living there on the weekend at the time of the kidnapping. The weekend of the kidnapping was their first overnight at this new residence. 2 years later, a German immigrant named Bruno Hauptmann was arrested after approximately $14,000 of ransom money was found in his garage. There was a 6-week trial. It was the trial of the century, very sensational. He was convicted and executed in the electric chair on April 3rd, 1936. He protested his innocence all the way to the day of his death. And even until today, controversy rages, hence this book. This is a mystery for the ages, and maybe it wasn't so much of a mystery, so we're going to dig into it. Lots of conflicting theories. Was it a mob hit? Was it an accident that was covered up? Did Charles Lindbergh himself do the baby in because the baby purportedly had some sort of genetic problem? Lots of rumors, lots of conspiracy. It's said that he actively obstructed the police investigation, and when we look at how the crime investigation unfolded, it's apparent that he really did. Why? What was his motive for obstructing the police? So that's what the author decided to look into. Chapter 1 is called A Malicious Prank. So March 1st, 1932, it was a dark and stormy night, but it really was a dark and stormy night. It was raining very heavily all afternoon. The rain kind of ended towards the evening, but everything was really muddy and wet and yucky, and there was a very strong wind, very heavy, cold wind. As I said, this was their first time staying in the house. There were no curtains in the house. In the house at that evening were Charles and Anne Lindbergh, the maid and the butler, Ollie and Elsie Watley, they were married, and the nursemaid, Betty Gow. Also, they had a dog. It's been so long since I read this. They had a dog named Wagoosh, who was a noisy fox terrier. So here's the official story. This is what the police took down when the child was reported missing. Anne and Betty Gow, the nursemaid, prepared Junior, we're going to call him Junior, all these repeated juniors and seniors. So we're talking about the baby Charles Lindbergh Jr. Preparing Junior for bed around 6:15 p.m. And he had a cold, and they wrapped him in cloth with Vicks VapoRub. And the book goes into describing how they prepared this child for bed. Boy, I'll tell you, the 30s were a whole different time. They pinned him in the bedding to the mattress. This is routine. This is what was done. They had put metal thumb guards on his thumbs to prevent him from sucking his thumbs. These were tied to the wrist. This poor child was like the prisoner of Zenda, you know. One of these metal thumb guards was found 29 days later in the middle of a muddy road at the entrance to the property. It was shiny, bright, and clean, like it had not been lying out there for 29 days. It had never been noticed by hundreds of searchers and cops and family who passed it, the exact spot on the entrance road, in 4 weeks. So the question was asked, was this dropped there later after the kidnapping by the perpetrator? It was never investigated. So prepare yourself to be astounded about the way this case was handled. It's a real mind blower. Anne and Betty, they could not fully latch the shutter on the east left window. It was sort of warped, brand new house, but it was warped and they couldn't close the shutter. And they tended to leave the window open. It was believed you should leave windows open at night for children to get fresh air. By 7:30, the baby was settled. The baby was wrapped up and pinned down, and Anne left. She was expecting Charles Lindbergh Sr., the flyer, home. So Betty was the last one in the bedroom with the child. She turned off the light and left Junior asleep in bed. And the question remains to this day, was this the last time he was seen alive by anyone other than his kidnapper? At 8:25, Charles Sr. arrived, put his car in the garage, and came into the kitchen through a door that connected the kitchen and the garage. At 8:35, Anne and Charles had dinner, and just after 9 o'clock, they were sitting by the fire when they heard a sharp crack, like the top slats of an orange box falling off a chair, is how they described it. And they thought, oh, was that from the kitchen? He had unreliable hearing. This is very interesting, something that they did not advertise. Charles Lindbergh was extremely hard of hearing. They weren't sure what they heard, but they did have servants in the house. So at 9:15, Charles Sr. went upstairs to take a bath in the bathroom adjacent to the nursery. And after his bath, he went to his library to read. This is a big fancy house. They're rich. The southeast window there had no cover on it and was directly below the nursery. This is something very important to remember. He's in the library with a window uncovered, and right above him is the baby's room. Anne got a bath ready and went into the baby's bathroom for tooth powder without turning the light on. So she didn't want to wake the baby up, so she never looked at the baby. She just went into the bathroom, got the tooth powder, and went out. And in the main bathroom, she rang Elsie, the maid who thought her day was over, rang her for hot lemonade about 10 o'clock. Betty and the Watleys, this is Elsie and Ollie Watley, had been in the servants' sitting room on the west side ground floor with the dog. The dog never heard any noise outside. The dog was renowned for being very noisy and barking at his own shadow. He never barked that night. Betty and the Watleys, at 10 o'clock, they separated. There was a scheduled potty visit for Junior, so they woke this poor kid up to put him on the toilet at 10 o'clock at night. Betty went through the kitchen and up to the nursery, turned on the bathroom light, closed that south open window, turned on the heater, went to get the baby, and discovered there was no baby. She panicked. She ran. She asked Anne, do you have the baby? And Anne went with her, and the two of them searched the nursery while then Betty ran over to the library and asked Charles Sr. downstairs if he had the baby. He went and got his rifle. He told Anne the baby's been kidnapped. They found the southeast nursery window open a crack, but there was a ransom note on the windowsill. They didn't touch it. He ran outside with the rifle and told the butler to call the sheriff. The butler called and drove his car to the side of the house where the windows for the baby's room were, so they could use the headlights of the car to illuminate the area. Charles Sr. told Watley, the butler, to go to town and buy a flashlight. At 10:25, Charles Sr. called the New Jersey State Police. He called his lawyer, Colonel Henry Breckenridge, in New York. The call to the New Jersey State Police at 10:25 happened half an hour after they claimed they found that the baby was missing. Why'd that take so long? Charles Sr. told the cop that showed up, Lieutenant Dunn, that the baby had been taken sometime between 7:30 and 10. Dunn thought this has got to be a hoax until he hung up, called what he knew to be Charles Lindbergh's house, and got the same voice on the phone again and realized, okay, it was not a hoax phone call. So the state police acted quickly. At 10:46, they sent out a statewide teletype to search all cars. At 11 o'clock, they set up checkpoints on the Holland Tunnel, the George Washington Bridge, and all the ferry ports. They put roadblocks on New Jersey streets, and all the hospitals were notified to check any babies brought in. And at 10:35, 10 minutes after the first call, the cops arrived. They were Wolf and Williamson of Hopewell. Now, Hopewell is a little town where this big mansion is built. They inspected the nursery. They found clay on the carpet and a suitcase below the southeast window. This is beginning to sound like John Benet Ramsey, you know. Lindbergh ordered them to not touch anything. He's instructing the cops. Outside, the cops found holes in the mud outside the study, the library where Charles Lindbergh had been, and they discovered a ladder tossed aside 75 feet away. And then tons of cops arrived, and they found footprints of at least 2 people. Remember, the ground was wet. It was great for footprints. They found footprints under the window of at least 2 people. Not the cops and Charles Lindbergh, but different people. The cops' theory was that 2 to 3 people had assembled some sort of homemade ladder. They found 2 sets of fresh footprints that went off to the southeast. And a car could have been parked either on a private lane or on the rough road called Featherbed Lane. Did they wear rubber boots? Did they wear overshoes? They followed these footprints from the ladder to the chicken coop, and the car had been parked there because they found marks on the road. They also found a clear footprint in the dirt under the nursery window that did not match the later suspect, Hauptmann, did not match his size, and it was never mentioned in the trial. So there's lots and lots of forensic evidence that wasn't followed, or forensic evidence that was intentionally left out of the trial, which is why this is still such a mystery today. They found a chisel lying near the ladder, and this is interesting because Hauptmann was a carpenter, but keep that, getting hiccups. Keep that in the back of your mind because that turns up again. At this point in 1932, kidnapping was not a federal crime. It was a state crime, and therefore the head of the New Jersey State Police, Colonel Norman Schwarzkopf, yes, that Schwarzkopf, the father of Storm and Norman. From the first Gulf War, his father, Colonel Norman Schwarzkopf, was the head of the New Jersey State Police. And a turf war between the police agencies immediately began, and the New Jersey police blocked the FBI and kept them out. And the reason they did that was Charles Lindbergh Sr., the big hero flyer, persuaded the New Jersey police to not include the FBI. Schwarzkopf was 37. He was a World War I veteran, a graduate of West Point. He was a former floor walker at a Newark department store. This was a privately hired by the department store cop, like a security detective who dressed like a shopper and spied on shoppers to catch shoplifters. He was what they called the house dick. He had never been a cop. He'd never done a police beat, never worked for a police agency, but now he's the head, right, of the New Jersey police. He'd never even ever arrested anyone. He hero-worshipped Lindbergh. He made no bones about it. He said, "I will break any oath for that man." So Lindbergh got put in charge of the investigation. Fingerprint expert Frank Kelly used gloves and was the first one, ostensibly, to open the ransom note. The ransom note said, "Dear Sir," written in pencil in a clearly disguised handwriting. Have 50, it was written wrong. This is full of really bizarre errors. I'm going to read it as though it were clear what it had written, but there's all kinds of punctuation and spelling errors. Have $50,000 ready, $25,000 in $20 bills, $1,510 bills, and maybe that's 15,000. Yeah, it's got weird punctuation. Anyway, after 204 days, we will inform you where to deliver the money. We warn you for making anything public or for notify the police the child is in good care. Indication for all letters are signature and 3 holds. There was a weird symbol consisting of 2 interlocking circles within the interlocking oval, colored blue, and oval was red. This symbol remained an unsolved mystery in the case. Was it intended to identify the kidnapper? Lindbergh never spoke about it. Was it from a secret society? It's known that certain college fraternities, rather like the Masons, employed such symbols in their correspondence. One such group was Beta Theta Pi, which had a chapter at Amherst College. Dwight W. Morrow, Jr. was a member of Beta Theta Pi, as was his father. The archivist at Beta Theta Pi's headquarters confirmed to this author that the fraternity employed a secret recognition symbol at the time of the kidnapping and still do so today. Asked whether it matched the symbol on the ransom note, the archivist said, "That's a secret." 2020 said, "That's a secret." So, yeah, that's another little tidbit that was just bizarre. So the question is, was this symbol related to the Dwight Morrows? Fraternity experts today still refuse to reveal the secret. No fingerprints were found anywhere. Let that go into your head. Anne and Betty had put Vicks VapoRub on their hands and rubbed it into this child and pinned him down. They didn't wash their hands, and yet there wasn't a single fingerprint in the whole room. Not of Anne, not of Betty, not of the Watleys, not of the baby. So the question begs to be asked, was this room wiped down? Which would imply that he wasn't kidnapped, because it would be too lengthy to completely carefully wipe down this entire room. You'd be in such a rush. It's a high-stress thing to kidnap a child and keep it quiet. Did Lindbergh do it, or did he order it done, the wiping down of the room? We don't know. Did Charles Sr. know or suspect the identification of the kidnapper? Did he wipe down the room or have it wiped down to avoid scandal? Could it have been a member of the family? Now, this book is full of speculation, and I'm not advocating any point of view. I want to make that very clear for the purposes of YouTube. Not blaming or assessing guilt on anybody. I'm simply raising the questions that the forensic evidence or lack thereof raised with a modern eye to the evidence. So did somebody wipe it down? Did Lindbergh wipe it down? Were they trying to avoid some kind of family scandal? Why would they cover up for a stranger? Did he suspect this was a prank gone wrong? Were they trying to avoid some sort of family shame? By the time days passed and it was too late to say anything, Did he then regret that he wiped away the prints? What's going on here? Could he have been prosecuted for obstruction of justice if it were discovered that he had interfered with forensic evidence? No fingerprints, and Lindbergh not questioned. This is the biggest mystery of all in this case, really. That really is the crux of why nothing was ever really figured out. Was the fingerprint collector incompetent? Former New Jersey Supreme Court judge thought so, and he sent a guy called Hudson, an expert who used new fingerprint techniques, and they found no adult prints in the room whatsoever. They did, however, find a couple of babies' prints on the babies' toys. But they also, this expert that the Superior Court judge sent, found no fingerprints. Kelly also found no prints at all on the ladder. Hudson said he found 30 to 40 prints on the ladder. Now keep in mind he's using a new technique. This ladder was porous wood and it was outdoors. So that could be the problem. But the guy with the new technique who found the prints did not find one single print of Hauptmann's. Schwarzkopf refused to search the FBI fingerprint bank, and he refused to do more tests on the ransom note. Was he protecting his turf against the FBI? Was he doing this under orders from Charles Lindbergh Sr.? We'll never know. The ladder was homemade, and it was homemade from old scraps of lumber. Where did the lumber come from? Until much later, there was no question about it at all. But it was never investigated. Did the lumber come from the newly built Lindbergh house that had lumber all over the place stacked? It was poorly made. It wasn't engineered in such a way as to be able to support the weight of an adult. It was also broken, like somebody tried to climb it and it broke. The position of it and the construction of it implied that this kidnapper would have had to have been quite athletic. He would have been carrying a heavy weight, an awkward distance, and an awkward location from the window, the angle to get out the window. They knew where the ladder had been positioned, and it wasn't quite flush under the window. So in order to carry a heavy baby and climb onto this ladder to get down would have been quite an athletic challenge. Keep in mind there were strong gale force winds, but that ransom note sat on an open windowsill and hadn't moved. Tests showed that Hauptmann would have been too heavy to climb this ladder at all, and he was a master carpenter. If he were going to build a ladder, it would have been a good ladder. There was no sign that anyone had fallen from any kind of a height. The suggestion was maybe the kidnapper climbed back out the window, going down the ladder. He fell and the baby was injured and died. There was no sign of anything like that having happened. An alternative theory is because of the wind, the kidnapper gave up on the ladder, tossed it aside, and ended up just coming in the front door. There was no mud on the rungs of the ladder, which would have been absolutely impossible because it was in the mud and the footprints were in the mud. The ladder was pristine. There probably would have been easy access to remove your boots through the front door, remove your boots, sneak up the stairs, grab the baby, and leave. The house had been used by many strangers. Many people knew that it wasn't locked, that it was easy to go in and out, and the floor plan was familiar. When the family wasn't home, the Watleys used to charge strangers and give them tours of the house. Now we're on chapter 2. Aid from unsavory quarters. Lindbergh was not interested in pursuing the ID of the kidnapper or arresting the kidnapper. He just wanted to pay the ransom, get the baby back. Schwarzkopf said, "I'll do anything he asks. I'll break any oath for that man." Anne Lindbergh, years later, said that Charles Sr., the flyer, was not a natural leader, but all the acclaim and the public heroics and stuff went to his head. He never listened to advice because he went against advice and had a successful flight, and it kind of convinced him that he was invincible and he knew everything. All law enforcement were told to do what Charles Lindbergh told them to do. They even sanctioned private law enforcement negotiations he did to get the child back and not be concerned about an arrest. So under Charles Lindbergh's authority and orders, law enforcement took their marching orders from him and were told, do whatever it takes, negotiate whatever. We don't bother trying to arrest the guy. We just want the baby back. There was a committee of 4 colonels, is what this was called. Lindbergh, Schwarzkopf, Breckinridge, and Wild Bill Donovan, who was a candidate for New York governor. They met daily at Hopewell. They decided what would be done in this investigation. They publicized the dietary needs of the child on the front page of every paper. They, on March 3rd, said that Charles Lindbergh would have anyone the kidnapper wanted to meet with the kidnapper and negotiate. He promised confidentiality, and he himself prepared to meet with the kidnapper. The New Jersey Attorney General, General W. Stevens, was not happy, and Lindbergh and the New York State Police were not happy because they could not guarantee the kidnapper freedom from prosecution. So they were trying to get the Attorney General to go along with this, and he was very unhappy about that kind of a request and said, no, if we catch the guy, we're going to prosecute him. New Jersey was just not going to go along with Lindbergh. Like the Attorney General, the Department of Justice of New Jersey they were not Schwarzkopf. They were not the New Jersey police. They were not going to go along with that kind of nonsense. So Lindbergh decided, well, I'll get help from the mob, from the underworld. Al Capone offered to Charles Lindbergh, get me out of prison and I'll free the baby. He offered $10,000 for information on the recovery and capture of the kidnapper that Al Capone did. East Coast gangs were feeling law enforcement heat, basically, and so they were willing to offer up money as a reward because they just wanted the cops to leave them alone. But it's pretty well accepted that a professional criminal did not do this. They were already making a fortune, and they didn't need the kind of law enforcement attention this brought down on their heads. And, $50,000 was nothing to Al Capone. So Lindbergh went to Mickey Rossner, a New York gangster with ties, and arranged through Lindbergh's lawyer and another person, a congresswoman, to try to negotiate New York mobsters getting involved in the investigation. Rossner had conditions. He wanted $2,500. And so this is a bad guy, right? And they're telling him, we'll meet whatever your demands are if you will be the liaison between the Lindberghs and the mob to find this baby. He said, well, okay, but first pay me $2,500, which was a lot of money in those days. I'm not going to be followed by law enforcement or the Secret Service, so I won't do this if the police follow me. And you have to give me a free hand to do whatever I want. Well, they agreed. They gave him a copy of the ransom note, which was a huge blunder, or was it intentional? Because he publicized it. And So there goes evidence. Once it's publicized, the handwriting, the style of writing, the content of the notes, public. And copycats now have the opportunity to get involved and try to get money too. 2 days later, a second note was received. And it said, don't worry. But they were not able to tell from this note, is this real or not? Was it fraud based on the original note being publicized? Both notes had similar misspellings of similar words, but the second note had harder vocabulary in it. It increased the demand to $70,000 and threatened to keep the baby longer. And it used the word we instead of I, implying there's more than one kidnapper. The note said that the kidnapping had been planned for years, but the baby was only 20 months old. And the Hopewell house was brand new. So Lindbergh gave note number 2 to Mickey Rossner, the gangster. He shared it with other criminals. And he shared it with bootleggers, killers, owners of speakeasies, drug traffickers. And Lindbergh, despite the fact that these people were characterized as bad people, vicious people, preferred to have them involved in this search for this baby and investigation, but not law enforcement, not the FBI, to get his son back. During this time, several of these criminals were caught running rum. This was Prohibition time, right? And they were given a free pass because they were known to be involved in the Lindbergh investigation. There was widespread outrage at Lindbergh's decision to keep the FBI out and deal with these mobsters, especially New York Police Commissioner Mulrooney. He was not happy. This guy Rossner had huge charges hanging over his head for grand larceny and stock theft. And because of his involvement with Lindbergh, part of the deal, they were all dropped. His gang pals told the media that okay, you guys, this crime was not committed by the underworld. This was an amateur. Note number 3 came to Breckenridge, one of the colonels, and it said that the kidnapper would name an intermediary to do the negotiating. Lindbergh was told to respond in the newspaper in an ad, and he was given the terminology to use. Enter Dr. John Condon, and this guy is a piece of work. I'm going to venture a guess that we're talking about a few psychopathic traits here. Let me describe for you what we're talking about. From this point on, Condon was to become the pivotal character in the case. Bombast, chauvinist, sycophant, liar, egotist supreme. Condon was all of these and then some. This was the man who, according to the actress Rosalind Russell and numerous other correspondents, had been responsible for looking after the illegitimate son of Dwight W. Morrow. It's possible to believe anything of the good doctor. And he was not a medical doctor. He was a doctor of pedagogy. So his whole story, I don't want to read the whole story, but I did try to summarize it. He claims that he had rescued 3 different children in 3 different years. So one kid 1 year, one kid another, one kid another. Each of the 3 children he rescued were drowning while ice skating. Okay, what are the odds of that? He got the Congressional Medal of Honor because the media made such a big deal out of one of these rescues. Then he saved another couple of kids from drowning from an overturned canoe. How did that canoe turn over? He was called a Superman, always on hand when a life needs saving. He then saved, now, okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, number 6, he saved a kid who went off a pier and couldn't swim. Then he saved another one while ice skating, saved them from drowning. He'd spent several years, apparently, patrolling frozen lakes just in case an opportunity for life-saving should present itself. One wonders whether he pushed them in before saving them. Age had undimmed his heroism, whatever else it might have done to him. In March 34, he was among several hundred people in a Bronx theater when it caught fire. In the ensuing panic, with everyone rushing for the exits, he stood on a seat, reasoned with the audience, and restored calm. He was given a testimonial by the theater manager, like the Cowardly Lion. He offered to be an intermediary, and he was well known. He was a contributor of poetry and articles signed Patriot or Justice or Lone Star. And he was always in the paper. He took every opportunity to get himself in the paper. His heroic, generous offer, he wanted $1,000 and he would be the go-between. This guy's a 72-year-old part-time professor, bragging constantly about his heroism and his patriotism, and P.S. never paid any taxes. He was a tax dodger. He's been described as a pseudo-humble nut. The next day, after first presenting himself, he received a message from the kidnapper at his house, because of course he did. It was full of weird, stupid misspellings. It included a sealed note for him to give to Lindbergh. He did not keep, the good doctor, did not keep this note a secret, as was instructed. The mob contact, meanwhile, this is unbelievable. This is like the gang that couldn't shoot straight. The mob contact at Hopewell had him open up the enclosed note for Lindbergh, and it was the beginning instructions for a drop-off arrangement. Lindbergh made Dr. Condon the go-between and invited him to stay the night in the baby's nursery. What did this have to do with Dwight Morrow's crazy son? Now keep in mind, Condon supposedly was his guardian. Condon required, first, before he agreed to do anything, that he had to speak with Anne Lindbergh. It was 3:30 in the morning. She was in trauma over her child disappearing, but they had to wake her up so she could speak to this guy. He later wrote about her tearful mother's appeal, and I wrote, gack. They describe her, they describe him sleeping in the nursery, grasping the rungs of the crib and crying. So the next day they arranged him to be the go-between. They placed a response in the newspaper in an ad, and they signed it with his initials, which come out to be JAFC, JFC. And then he became known ever after as JAFSIE, JAFC. It's alter ego. Chapter 3, More Harm Than Good. Breckenridge moved into Condon's house, and only the wife was at home to receive the call from the kidnapper, so he thought it would be a good idea to move in. When the kidnapper called, the wife answered the phone and claimed she heard an Italian accent in the background of the phone call. The next day, a cab arrived with an envelope to his house, And the cab driver was interrogated, and he said, hey, I just was handed an envelope with the guy who flagged down my cab, and he told me to deliver the envelope, and he gave me $1, which was a lot of money in those days. The note told Condon how to find another note, and the other note told him to bring the ransom money with him, and the money wasn't ready yet. It's hard to get that much money in the right number of bills the way that they wanted. Condon took a guy called Reich, and Reich was just one of the hangers-on, and took him to the location described in the note, found the next note, and followed the directions to a cemetery where he was told in the note he would be met. Now, this is Condon's story. We don't know. He was met by an Italian-looking guy with his face covered who walked past him. He eventually saw a white handkerchief being waved from inside the cemetery. The guy, with the same voice as on the phone, asked, and how did he know that? Because he didn't answer the phone. His wife did. Asked, have you got the note? And Condon replied, yes. The question was, do you have the money? And Condon said, no, not until I see the baby. Suddenly, the cemetery security guy showed up. And the guy with the guy, ostensibly the kidnapper collecting the ransom, fled because he thought that the cemetery security guy was law enforcement. And he jumped over a fence and he ran off. Condon chased him and yelled at him and caught up with the guy because he's Superman. And he grabbed his arm. He called this guy a coward. He sat on a bench for a friendly chat for more than an hour. Condon said it was an hour and 40 minutes, but later decided, well, maybe it was just an hour and 10 minutes. He claims the guy told him that he was Scandinavian, one of 6 people, 4 men and 2 women, that were involved in this kidnapping, and that his boss would beat him if he did not show up with the money. Condon then claimed, if you're wondering why this is so complicated, well, it's complicated. Condon said that he asked how the baby was, and he was told the baby was well. He offered to send proof in the form of the baby's sleeping garment, this guy did, and told Condon to tell Lindbergh that the child was being kept on a boat, the location of which would be given after the ransom was paid. Then he left after telling Condon to put an advertisement in the Bronx Home News. This is a small little local newspaper. An ad that said, baby is alive and well, money is ready. So, this would have taken 5 minutes to talk about the actual details that Condon carried back with him, the arrangements of picking up the ransom. So what the heck were they talking about for an hour and 10 minutes? Did they know each other? Was this some sort of, was it Moro's son? Moro's illegitimate son? So, that's the part I forgot to mention. The son that Condon ostensibly was the guardian for, took over his education and raising, was illegitimate son of Charles Dwight Murrow Sr., Anne's father. It was her illegitimate half-brother. And we'll talk a lot more about that later. Anyway, the description that Condon gave was sketchy. He said he couldn't see. It was too dark. He said the guy had Asian eyes and blonde hair. But then he also said he was wearing a hat. The guy claimed he was Scandinavian. But if he had blonde hair, why did he look Italian? And then Condon said he had a German accent. So you can see that this is just ridiculous. The cemetery guard had a completely different story. He said he saw 2 people talking. One told the other, uh-oh, there's a cop coming. And then the other guy ran off. And he asked this guy, the runner, what he was doing. And Okay, the cop asked the guy that didn't run away, what was the runner doing? And the guy who didn't run away, Condon, theoretically, said, I have no idea. Wait a minute, I'll go ask him. So picture this. Condon claims he chased after a guy and who saw the cop. He chased after him and grabbed him, and they had a lengthy conversation, like an hour and 10 minutes. The cop says that's not exactly what happened. These two were conferring when I stumbled on them. One of them says to the other, oh my God, a cop, and he starts to run. The cop asks the one who didn't run, Condon, what were you guys doing? And Condon says, I don't know, I'll have to go ask him. And he went off after him. And the cop's physical description was completely different. He claimed this guy had no coat, no hat, no cap, and no foreign accent. So it's highly unlikely it was Hauptmann, and it not at all like Condon's description. So the guard's description of the second man, it just didn't match at all, and he claimed he was younger with a mustache and a completely different size, Not German, not a blonde hair, not in a hat, and just the whole story that Condon told, completely different. So did Condon make this whole thing up? Whether he did or not, the ad was placed, and a package did come with the baby's suit in it, sleeping suit in it. It had been newly washed. Lindbergh said, yes, this was his son's suit, but the question remains, how would he know that? It was a very common brand. I forget the name of it. Carter's, I think. Very common for babies to wear this, and it had been washed. There were no identifying marks on it. They got a new note with that same weird symbol that came with the suit. And it demanded the ransom without them seeing the baby first. So now we have got a standoff, kind of. 8 hours after getting the ransom, the note said, they would tell them where to find the baby. And they were warned, if you try to trap us when we come to get the money, you'll be responsible for whatever happens. Lindbergh ordered that there be no recording of the serial numbers of the money. That's how the government would trace ransom money. But a Treasury officer, Ire, said, no way am I going to go along with that. That helps the kidnappers, and he recorded the numbers, the Treasury numbers. And he made sure that some of these bills were gold certificates. They were changing off the gold standard, and the old bills were on the gold standard, and they were marked in a certain way. And he made sure that they were included in this ransom money because they were easier to trace. Once they went off the gold standard, they withdrew all those bills from the public, and it became against the law to have them or use them. Lindbergh did not realize that they were recording these things. So 2 weeks went by, and they did not get another note with arrangements on how to deliver the ransom. They noticed that these notes had been coming from about basically the same post office, the same area. And law enforcement wanted to stake out the mailboxes in that area, and Lindbergh said no. This was a missed opportunity because if they had found who was mailing them, they could have followed them. Lindbergh kept law enforcement and FBI at bay. Of course, this was not a federal offense yet. The FBI had no jurisdiction, so they just went away. Lindbergh was uncooperative. He confided to fellow aviator Tom Lampierre about the whole ongoing thing. Breckenridge was persuaded by Lampierre, so Lindbergh got his friend to do his dirty work for him, Lampierre, and they told the FBI a tiny bit but not all. So what happened was Lindbergh was confiding in his friend and trying to get him to, keep it a secret. But his friend Lampier actually got talked into divulging some of this stuff to Breckinridge. Breckinridge went to the FBI, but it wasn't much information. Department of Labor, Murray Garrison guy, was hired to reduce immigration by 90% and to get rid of the commies. Now, this is pertinent to the story. They did this by disregarding civil liberties, constitutional rights, and frequently persecuted and prosecuted the innocent. This was his behavior, this Murray Garrison, was considered a complete disgrace by other people hired in that same department as he. They regarded him as corrupt, and eventually he was jailed for corruption around the time of World War II. Interestingly, his 1931 to 1933 Labor Department records went missing. And this is germane to the story because ostensibly foreigners are involved in this kidnapping. Was it an Italian accent they heard on the phone? The guy had a German accent, or was he Scandinavian? They were foreigners, and xenophobia. So these records all went missing. They disappeared. Isn't that curious? Lindbergh sent this Murray guy to interview Anne in the middle of the night. This poor woman, they will not leave her alone. Oh, and she was pregnant with her second child at this point. And they put her through a nonsensical interrogation until dawn. He called Betty Gow a damn liar and a monkey. She was, I believe she was Scottish. And in front of Anne, he actually raked the fireplace in the nursery looking for the baby's bones. Lampier, Lindbergh's friend, was now secretly a full-on FBI informant, and he told them all about the letter that increased the ransom amount. He told them all about Condon, or Jaffe. They didn't know this. Lindbergh kept it secret from the FBI. So the FBI started monitoring Jaffe's mail, and they got the next ransom note. They got their hands on it. And it told them to be ready for the money pickup, and this was a month since the baby was kidnapped. So they decided that Lindbergh would go in the car with Condon to drop off the ransom. Lindbergh brought a gun. So at 7:45, a cab came to the door with an envelope, a note in an envelope, and directions to a note on the table outside the nursery, a plant nursery, not the baby nursery. This is a business, a plant nursery, with that weird symbol on it. And they gave them 3/4 of an hour to get there. They were told not to call the police. There were lots of stupid misspellings. Condon and Reich went with money. They didn't, Lindbergh, I guess, didn't go. They went with the money in 2 boxes because it wouldn't fit in the one box the kidnapper demanded. And there were $20,000 of it in gold certificates in a separate bundle. This would be crucial to the investigation later. Lindbergh told the New York Police Department, "Don't follow us," and he drove to this florist across from the cemetery, which was dark and deserted. So you've got Condon and Reich with the money, and then you have Lindbergh. They found the next note, and they walked down the street. They were told to walk down the street with the money, and we'll meet you as you're walking down the street. They saw a guy in a brown suit and hat walking towards them, covered his face with a hanky, and he passed their car. They were sitting in the car waiting, and he passed their car and walked out of sight of them. And Condon wasn't going to let Lindbergh go and take the money because he feared that he'd shoot the kidnapper. Condon went without the money to talk to the kidnapper. He found the road that had been described in the note. It was a narrow dirt road. He saw no one, and he told Lindbergh, okay, we better go back and you stay out of this. And immediately there was a shout from the cemetery that was variously described as, hey, Doc, Doc, or I, Doc. Lindbergh was in the car now, more than 100 yards away, parked in the wrong direction, opposite direction from where the sound was, and notoriously, well, not that well known, but very hard of hearing. And he swore on the stand that it was Hauptmann. And this swayed the jury, and he got the death penalty because of Lindbergh's testimony that he himself heard Hauptmann yell, hey, Doc. But he was partially deaf. Why did he lie? Condon, once again, Condon saw the guy who had walked by, jump a high wall and hide behind a hedge. And Condon said that this guy was a guy called John Hammett. Condon is crazy, and he's making things up. I think I can safely make that without having to qualify it with allegedly. He said John Hammett, some guy he knew, demanded the money. Condon didn't have the money because, remember, he left the car without the money. He wanted Hammett to tell him, Condon, where the baby was first. So they split up. John went to write a note about where the baby was, and Condon went to get the ransom money. 15 minutes later, they met up. Condon brought the box with $50,000, but no gold certificates. And the regular money was hard to trace. And John accepted the money, even though it was less than what they demanded, $70,000. He told him the baby was in a boat, the boat Nellie, moored at Gay Head, but told him not to open the envelope for the details for 6 hours. So they parted company. Condon gave Lindbergh the envelope. He agreed not to open it for 6 hours, but shortly after they'd driven down the road, he pulled over and opened it. He couldn't stand it, and he opened it. It says the boy is on board Nellie. It's a small boat, 28 feet long. 2 persons are on the boat. They are innocent. You will find the boat between Horseneck Beach and Gay Head near Elizabeth Island. The FBI had staked out the house across from Condon's house, but they got too late to his house. They missed the ability to follow Condon and Lindbergh to the drop-off. They did see them return. They saw them leave to meet with Breckenridge, and they were meeting at Iray's apartment. Oh, no, I'm sorry, at the Morrow apartment with Iray. I think I'm going to stop here. I've gone long enough. And I know that the details of this are a confused mess right now. They were confused. The court was confused. We are confused. But there's going to be a development of all of this, and I hope you stick with it because it gets really intense, and it's a fascinating case. It would make an interesting case for true crime detectives today, I gotta tell you. So, I hope you're enjoying it. Stick around. I'll be back with part 2. Thanks.